Chegamos à 4ª edição do Seminário, Salvador, Cidade, Inovadora, o maior evento anual de empreendedorismo e inovação da cidade. O evento faz parte do programa Salvador 360, da Prefeitura de Salvador, que tem como objetivo fomentar práticas de sucesso do empreendedorismo inovador e de impacto do Brasil e do mundo. Desde 2017, muita gente boa já passou por aqui. Cientistas, profissionais, empreendedores, estudiosos, além dos participantes fundamentais para o evento. O tema desse ano é Inovação e Sustentabilidade na Real. O conteúdo tem tudo a ver com o momento que a gente está passando, já que nunca foi tão importante pensar, falar e agir de forma sustentável. O evento é dividido em 3 salas: Planeta, Pessoas e Lucro. Tem muita gente bacana discutindo sobre inovação. Faça um tour pelos painéis e aproveite! Envie suas perguntas e comentários através do chat. Desejamos um ótimo evento. 4º Seminário Salvador, Cidade Inovadora. Inovação e Sustentabilidade na Real.
Welcome everyone to this session on gender and climate change. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all attendees in many parts of the globe. We have folks from Leamington Spa, from Copenhagen, from Santiago de Chile, from Paris, from London, and from many cities in Brazil. Thank you for joining us today. I am Adriana Campelo, Director of Resilience at the Municipal Secretariat of Sustainability, Innovation, and Resilience of Salvador. And today, I will serve as a moderator in this session. Firstly, I'd like to thank our speakers, Silvia Marcon, Head of the C40 Women for Climate Initiative, Luisa Miranda Morel. Luisa is Manager for Diplomacy and City Engagement at C40. Paloma Costa, Member of the United Nations Secretary-General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. Thaili Terena, Indigenous Terena, Member of the National Council of Indigenous Women. It is my honor to welcome you all to this talk. I'd like to express our gratitude to C40 for supporting and helping us to put this session together. C40 is a network of the world's megacities committed to addressing climate change. C40 supports cities to collaborate effectively, share knowledge, and drive meaningful, measurable, and sustainable action on climate change. We all know that climate change does not impact people equally. The poor and the vulnerable communities are more affected by the consequences and effects on climate change, especially the woman. Research has shown that women tend to suffer more in climate-related disasters than men, and also tend to carry the burden of its consequences. According to the United Nations, empowering women in economy and closing gender gaps in the workplace are key to achieve 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. However, women remain less likely to participate in the labor market than men around the world. Instead, women are overrepresented in informal and vulnerable employment. Also, gender difference in legislations affect both developing and developed economies and women in all regions. Today, we're going to talk about how does climate change impact women more than men and why? What can we do to overcome this impact? Also, we'll talk about how can we work towards equality with regards leadership and decision-making. To start this conversation, I would like to invite our first speaker, Luisa Miranda Morel. Luisa is the Diplomacy and City Engagement Manager for Inclusive Climate Action Program at C40. Prior to joining C40, Luisa led the design and delivery of monitoring and evaluation framework for CARE, Nepal's earthquake response program, focused on the impact of the program on women's empowerment, social inclusion, inclusive governance, and resilience. Luisa holds a Master Science in Building and Urban Design for Development from University College London. Welcome, Luisa.
Thank you, Adriana. I think that was a very useful presentation of C40. As Adriana has mentioned, we're a network of the world's leading cities working together to address climate change. And these cities together represent 1/4 of the global economy and over 700 million citizens around the world. I am, as Adriana has mentioned, the Diplomacy and City Engagement Manager specifically for inclusive climate action. This is a program within C40 that aims to highlight inclusion as a central pillar of ensuring that cities are delivering on the Paris Agreement with ambitious climate mitigation and adaptation actions. And how do we achieve this? We achieve this through inclusive processes, which means that everyone's voice must be heard in the design of climate actions and plans. Inclusive policies, meaning understanding the cause for, but also the potential impacts of climate action. And when it is inclusive or exclusive, it means responding to mitigate any negative impacts that will result from these climate actions. And finally, inclusive climate action means thinking about measuring and tracking the impacts of climate actions once they have been implemented to make sure that they deliver what cities promise in their climate action plans, but also to their citizens. When we talk about gender, which is a cross-cutting characteristic, it's really important to highlight that, at least for C40, gender is understood as the socially constructed characteristics of men and women. This includes norms, roles, relationships of and between these groups. And different gender categories can include lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, everybody. But today we are going to mainly be talking about women, with the understanding that as a group, women are immensely diverse. They have different needs, capacities, characteristics, interests, and priorities that will vary depending on the context where they live and their age, ethnicity, class, nationality, and other things. And while we understand that women will experience climate change differently to men, as Adriana has mentioned, different women will also experience climate change differently to each other and be able to influence climate action and policy differently to each other too. For example, in the United States, 84% of studies show that all pregnant women exposed to high temperatures or air pollution are more likely to have children who are premature, underweight, or stillborn. Within that group, women of color and minority groups will have greater risk of these birth complications because they are often found living in lower income areas in the city, where there is heat island effect, energy poverty, and there is greater proximity to high polluting industries. This is why it is so crucial to ensure that when considering inclusive processes, policies, and impacts, women are not generalized as a collective monotonous group. Their different experiences are symptoms of a series of systemic root causes that need to be better understood in order to address inequalities within gender responsive and transformative climate policy, planning, and interventions. Because you can't resolve a problem without first seeing and understanding what it really is. There are various ways of understanding the root causes of why women experience these climate change differently. And one way that I find useful is to understand these through 3 key entry points: Power relations, which means the power relations through which people live their lives intimately within the home and through social networks in a non-formal sphere. And also in relation to activism and citizen and market negotiations within the economy, for example, which we refer to as the formal sphere. The second entry point is systems and structures, which refers to the discriminatory social norms, customs, values, and exclusionary practices. And as well as that, the laws and the policies and institutional procedures, as well as the services that are present in the formal sphere. And finally, there's the third pillar, which is agency. And this refers to the consciousness and confidence and self-esteem that women individually have, as well as their aspirations and the knowledge, skills, and capabilities that they're able to acquire through formal education. So all of these three things, for me, are useful pillars with which to understand why women experience climate change differently. To give you a couple of examples, the most evident and classic example of how unequal relations translate into disproportionate impacts of climate change for women can be observed as the result of the traditional role that women play in the home and the power relations that result from that. In Latin America, more than 1 in 4 households are headed by women. This is the highest rate anywhere in the world. Latin America is also a region where women will be responsible for the health and well-being of themselves, but also, and often more importantly, that of their children, their husband, their parents, their husband's parents, and even sometimes the extended family. And these dynamics often position them in multiple roles as household manager, caregiver, livelihood earner, community organizer and leader, and sometimes even as a local health worker. And this is only one reason for why climate disasters, as Adriana also mentioned, can impact women so severely. Any climate disaster, whether it is typhoons, flooding, drought, whatever, that damages or destroys the local environment, resources, the food, the water, the energy source that women depend on to live, work, and provide for their families will inherently and directly triple the number and the difficulty of women in the fulfillment of their responsibilities and their roles in society. And this is especially the case if their male counterparts are either absent due to several reasons, or they have left to go work somewhere else. This often happens after a disaster because families are seeking to recover more quickly, or they have passed away because actually the morbidity of men is greater because of the role that they fulfill as the protector and defender of a family and household. So another example of power relations and how it affects women is a more recent example. For example, in the context of Latin America and the Caribbean, where already, because of the patriarchal society that we live in, up to 12,000 women are killed every year, mostly by their partners. And these existing power relations and lack of protection for women and young girls in the home has been compounded by the COVID-19 lockdown, which is inherently a climate disaster as well, a climate crisis. For example, in Colombia, calls to domestic violence helplines have jumped by 91% since the stay-at-home orders were put in place. And this same report that gave us this figure highlights that we can be sure that the number of domestic violence incidents is much higher because fewer than 40% of survivors report a crime or seek help of any kind in the first place. And this is a significant figure, bearing in mind that in Latin America and the Caribbean region, the highest rates of gender-based violence in the world comes from just 6 countries: Brazil, Peru, Mexico, Argentina, El Salvador, and Bolivia. And this accounts for 81% of cases globally. The same crisis of COVID-19 has also put women at greater risk because of the role that they fulfill in the workforce. Globally, women make up over 70% of the global health and social workforces. The second entry point that I mentioned was systems and structures. And this is, when thinking about climate change, the symptoms of how discriminatory social structures and systems have translated into the disproportionate impact of climate change on women can be observed historically in cities. Because of the low level of representation, and in many countries, the invisible voice that women and other minority gender groups have in policymaking and in the negotiation of the urban space. And this has resulted in disparities across the built environment, particularly when you're considering access, mobility, safety, and freedom from violence, health and hygiene, climate resilience generally, and security of tenure. And all of these elements influence the impacts of climate change on an individual. For example, and this is also the case when it comes to climate action. For example, in the European Union, the percentage of female employees in the energy industry is about 20%. And the share of women in decision-making positions in the energy sector is much lower. Another example of the disparities in relation to systems and structures is that, and in relation also to climate action, is that because of this absence of women and women's voice in urban climate and energy planning, it is less likely that their interests and needs are taken into account. This can be seen in the provision of services. In terms of economic contribution, for example, in developing countries, the lack of access to and safety of transport reduces the probability of women's participation in the labor force by 16.5%. This is an International Labor Organization figure. In terms of service provision, evidence from Mexico City, for example, indicates that 1 in 2 Mexican women have been victims of harassment on public transport, and 3 in 4 women feel insecure when traveling through the city. In terms of land management and regulation, women's lack of access to land tenure hinders the potential contribution that women, over half of the world's population, can make to reducing and eradicating poverty. The decisions and the policies that shape who can own land and who can own certifications for that land really defines how women can benefit from post-disaster aid, for example. Because a lot of post-disaster aid comes under the condition that you have land certifications, and women don't have these in many countries, such as Nepal, for example. What can be observed, for example, in the same case of Nepal, also, is because of the cultural inequalities and the ways that men and women engage with each other and the dynamics between them, despite great efforts made to train and certify female masons and laborers in the reconstruction of the whole country, which was a huge opportunity, a huge labor opportunity. Many hardworking and many very capable women who were trained to rebuild the country very quickly returned to more traditional roles as soon as they could, due to the pressure from their families and their own preferences, or because within the construction sector there was very little respect from their male counterparts about what they could achieve and who they should take orders from. Finally, the third pillar is agency. And with regards to agency, existing cultural gender norms continue to reinforce inequalities through the formal school and non-formal home educational systems. For example, after the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, women made up to 70% of fatalities, mainly because their mobility was hampered by the fact that, unlike men, they had not been taught to swim. And generally, this is very unfortunate because women and young girls have an incredible potential to be significant agents of change in climate action. For example, as Adriana mentioned already with relation to the informal sector, women make up a significant portion of the waste sector, of the waste informal sector. And this is a crucial sector for combating climate change. And yet, in the context of COVID-19, the impact of the informal sector is likely to jeopardize the livelihoods of 740 million women globally, who would otherwise be contributing to the greater sources of recycled, reused, and repurposed waste in cities. And this is not only affecting their capacity, but also their families' capacity to recover economically in the long run. Such trends in education and the expectations on women's capacities in every aspect of society translate into shaping the limitations and the opportunities within which they can contribute to defining and implementing ambitious climate action. And yet, in many countries, in Latin America as well, including Brazil, women and young girls have and continue to demonstrate incredible resilience and perseverance in the fight towards gender equality, which I'm really glad we will learn about in the following presentations. So I hope that with this presentation, I've demonstrated some of the evidence for why addressing gender inequality and ambitious climate action does not only require an integrated technical response, but also an integrated political response, engaging political actors and supporting political movements such as those on this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luisa. It was enlightening, and thank you very much for teaching us more about this theme. I think it's very important that we can, first of all, understand and acknowledge where are the problems and how we can start to think about to address that. So I think it was very interesting that how you explained the 3 entry points. And it reminds me something that I think in many countries, we witness that globally, the domestic violence during the COVID. In South Africa, for instance, it was something that was addressed by the president as a national problem. So because of the COVID, we witnessed how the domestic violence and violence against women has raised. So thank you very much, and we're gonna continue in this conversation. So now I'm gonna call to this talk Paloma Costa. Paloma is a young climate activist from Brasilia. She's finished her studies in law and social science at the University of Brasilia. Sorry. She coordinates the Engajamundo Climate Working Group, a Brazilian organization led by young people, and also she works as a legal advisor at the Instituto Socioambiental on issues that address social environmental rights, including indigenous peoples, land use, and the economy of the peoples of the forest. Recently, and it is a very honor for us from Brazil, Paloma was appointed one of the 7 young people to taking part of the United Nations Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. Welcome, Paloma, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this invitation. I feel really honored to be in a panel where we only have women participating on it. This represents a big step for all of us, young women and women all around the world that are fighting for our spaces. So when we have a panel composed only by women, we can be sure we are going on the right path. And this is something I learned to realize because of my work. As Adriana was mentioning, I coordinated the working group of climate changes of Engajamundo, which is a youth-led organization that is in over 20 states in Brazil. And we have over 3,000 young people volunteering in our organization. And in this 2 years experience as the coordinator, I learned to come and enter on the more diversity of spaces. And the first thing I look when I enter in something like this is who is participating, which fights and which things those persons who are talking are representing. And that's why I feel very honored on being in a panel like this. I also, as Adriana mentioned, work as an advisor at Instituto Socioambiental, which is an organization that teaches me how to fortify and give full support for indigenous associations to be able to meaningfully participate on decision-making spaces. Learning that they are the ones in the front lines, which I know that Ali is going to make a more wonderful presentation about this. But just to mention that are really representing all of our fights and have much more to say than each one of us. And that's why also, because of these experiences, I also, when I come to these spaces, I also have to question. I think it's like something that is a burden for us young people that are learning to be more diverse, more inclusive, is that why do we still have the majority of people participating being white people who are in same context in cities and things like this? So I am very, very, very grateful that I have my sister and this young woman that I admire so much, that is Tali, that is going to speak next to me. So please pay full attention to her. And when you think about participating, you have to think like that participation means that you have to have access to information, which means that information works in both hands. As much as you have to have accountability, transparency, data who are easy to find and easy to understand, you also have to listen different voices. How can you come to a decision if you don't hear all of the voices? If you think about the environment, which is a collective right for all of us and a collective duty for all of us, we have to think that everyone should be included in the discussion. Because if you think clearly, if you have only white men who are in a healthy place discussing about it, how they are going to be able to understand the difficulties and the solutions that women, that people in vulnerable places or in the front lines come up with. The best solutions that we have for the world, and we have a bunch of solutions all around the world, are based on the front lines, with people such as the Ikpeng woman who realized how some fruits and how some foods are resilient for the impacts of the climate changes. And also being able with this realization to guarantee food sovereignty and food security for all of their communities. So if we don't reach those peoples who are guaranteeing food security, food sovereignty, and a climate establishment equality, where we can all can stay being alive here in this planet, because they are the ones defenders our forests, our environment directly with their lives. How can we come up with a solution if we don't reach those peoples? So we have to understand that participation, and also including all of the voices, is one of the main steps that we have to be leading. And this means giving education, giving health equality for all, giving fair wages to all, and also means understanding, listening, and not only listening. All the decisions that we come in a collective way, we have to come like with them being with them like really meaning something. Nowadays, we know that most of the consultations given to young people, women, are given just to accomplish a formality. This is not right. It has to be with some kind of vinculation where the voices matters and the decisions come up with a equality in a way that everyone is on agreement. As being a voice that represents the diversity of the movements of the young people here in America Latina, and being now on this position to give direct advisor to the Secretary General with the other 6 young leaders who are going to be reading and really accessoring the Secretary General on the climate recovery plan post-COVID. I know I have like a great above work to do in this position. I have to be opening spaces for other American Latin young people who are going to come after me. I have to be opening spaces for young women. I have to be opening spaces for indigenous communities, quilombolas communities, and all traditional communities. So I have to be guaranteeing that these spaces really have some kind of meaningful participation, where language is not a barrier, where all the capacities, because all of the people have different capacities and everyone has something to add on the debate. So we have to build spaces where all of these voices are included, are heard, and are taken into consideration. And being young, it's to realize that most of these spaces where decisions are being made has not a young people in there. So I know this is historical to be in this position right now and being able to be one of the first who will be in this advisor position directly with a great leader as the Secretary General of the United Nations. So I know I have this work to be opening spaces and also be thinking of all of the demands of people in Latin America directly to there, for these voices to be heard and understood and really included. And this also means opening spaces for women. During my work in Engaja Mundo, we realized that if we learn about this inclusiveness, it's a word difficult to say, we have to be guaranteeing that these voices are participating. That's why we started building our delegations to go to COPs, to go to climate weeks, to go to all of these decision-making spaces with a gender balance, with vulnerable balance, regional balance, including all of different voices and people in the communities. We cannot keep staying having not voices with diversity, because if we keep doing the same things, we are going to keep coming to the same solutions that are not solutions at all. If they were, we wouldn't be in a situation like we are right now, that we have less than 10 years to revigor all of the situation and to change everything. And when you start thinking about parity, that is a necessity, gender parity, regional balance, balance of where people live and where they are based, what are the works. We understand that when you start thinking about the recovery plans, which means guaranteeing green jobs, for example, that is something that has been raised in the Green Deals negotiations. You have to understand that women are the most impacted, and you have to guarantee that green jobs also includes the works that most of the women have to do that are extra works. Because most of the women, they work, they study, they take care of their houses, they have to take care mostly of their childs, because we know how some partners are aware of the situation, and this is not included. Those women are not paid for this extra salary, and they have to be all of the time much more tired, much more unproductive, because they are doing so much more extra works. So that's why we have to guarantee that all works are recognized. And we have to guarantee that women are in position of power. That's the only way we can be sure that all of these things are going to be included when it comes to building some legislative measure or some public policy. White men, they don't think about it. They don't understand the problems and all the implications that these extra works come. Me as a young woman, I am seeing this in all of my friends. We are starting to be a generation with so much health problems. But I mean health problems in some ways that we are super tired. We have to study, we have to work, we have to take care of our families, we have to take care of adults' jobs, we have to be a volunteer, we have to be activists, we have to learn about laws and all EPCC data that are super difficult to understand. And those are not paid jobs. These are not recognized as a job. It just means you are a volunteer. And when you are a woman, your job is even more difficult because people tend to not include you as a woman. And imagine if you are a young woman. This means you cannot understand all the difficult and all the data that are there. This is common. It's really sad to say that, because this is something that happens, that people look to a young person and just say she cannot understand all the implications that the matter has. And this doesn't mean anything, because we all have something to add and we all understand things in our different ways. And this is what guarantees that we will have like a future to come, or a life to come, a possible future to come. And this also means thinking about, for example, financial flows. Today, nowadays, it's still data with women being less paid than men, even the women doing these extra works. And this is so crazy to still think that after 50 years of women guaranteeing their space to be human beings such as white men, where we can vote now, at least in most of the countries, where we can meaningful, like not meaningful, like at least in a minimum way participate, and we still earn less than men than white men. When you think about, for example, carbon markets that come as solutions for countries like ours that still have a barrier of forest, you see that in any plan, it's included the party of the woman. Of course, we had the gender plan in the last COP, but this doesn't mean that we accomplished it and that we got there. This means that we are still doing first steps, but we have to rush on these steps. How many women are suffering? How many women are losing their capacity and their minds because they are seeing their child starving, their lives too complicated because they don't have any time for themselves? This is a psychology threat. It's like all this warrior with fake news. If we still believe that there are some difference between people and that we have to keep having white men on these spaces, we are not going to change our ways and our paths in this world. And that's why we have to guarantee and keep guaranteeing spaces for women to be in power, for women to listen to women, and for people all around the world to listen to women. And we know that these women who are in the most vulnerable positions in their communities are the ones that need mostly to be heard. And that's why we have, and I believe that this is one of my duties to the society is to be guaranteeing that these voices come directly to these high level spaces, and to really open spaces, to really open the doors and just guarantee that these voices can be heard. That's it. Thank you so much.
Paloma, it was really, really inspiring. And you mentioned something that I took some notes here that I'd like to highlight. So you talk about the power of connection, so the power of conversation and the importance of listening other people to understand and actually to start to create a space and start to build solutions. And also, you said something that really reminded me of situations, and I think it's really important, that all voices matter. And this thing of equality and inclusion should not be just to accomplish a formality. It really needs to be to make change, to put women in position to decide. 3 weeks, I'm going to tell a small anecdote here. 3 weeks ago, there was a talk, and then they prepare a card, and in this card, this invitation, all white men, all white blokes, and just one woman, a manager. And then someone said, actually, I got lots of messages saying that it doesn't look good. So we had to change that. And they said, okay, we need to think that we have to change that when you appoint a director, when you decide who is going to take that position, not to look good in the invitation and not to look good in the card. So this is the reality, and you're not going to pretend that it's not. What we have to do, in my perception, my opinion, is we need to change how we're going to have access. And I'm saying now women here because this as Luisa mentioned, so this session is on gender related to women, but everyone needs to have access. I think this is the thing that we need to really fight for that. And I'm really happy that for the work that you are doing. So we now gonna invite another young, great lady. So Thaili, I'm very happy to invite here Thaili Terena. Thaili is an Indigenous Terena. She's an anthropologist and holds a master's degree in anthropology at the National Museum with a study on Indigenous women. Thaili is an activist in Indigenous movement. She is part of the National Council of Indigenous Women, linked to the Continental Liaison for Indigenous Women, where she works with the theme of youth and climate change. Please, Thaili, join us and welcome. We are looking forward to hear from you.
Hi, Adriana. Thank you. And first say hi to all and thank you to the Seminário of Salvador, Cidade, Inovadora, and especially to Adriana and Paloma that gave me the opportunity to talk with you guys today. For me, this subject that we are discussing is really important. And as Adriana was commenting before, it's really neat that women are in this places, yes, not only for specific talks about gender, but that we are included in other subjects as well. And I want to say sorry at first because my English is not that good. It's been a while that I don't speak. So if I make any mistakes, you guys, please forgive me. So before we talk about how Indigenous women are affected by the climate crisis, I think the most important thing that we need to do first is talk about how we arrived in this crisis that we are now. Because I've heard my ancestors always talking about the changes that the time that we are facing with the time, and we are never were heard about by the white man. Yeah. So we need to talk about the reasons that drag us to this point. When we are talking about the crisis, it's not only to talk about the capitalism and these big industries that that is ending with our resources, but also talking about the colonialism. Because if we are in this infrastructure nowadays, it's because we let the colonial way of living drag us to this point. And not only to talk about the colonialism, but talking about the power that it's in the white man's hands. And this is not only here in Brazil, but I think in most of the places of the world. Right now, the crisis that we are facing, it's led by the white man. So we need to give the faces, for those crises. And also the other thing that is important for us to keep in mind, and this is not, because normally when we talk about the crisis, we are always trying to find the guilty beyond ourselves. We try to point to someone the guilty, but we need to understand how we are included in this crisis. How what is our paper in these issues? So we also need to talk about our disconnection with our roots, because for us, indigenous peoples, this is something that is really clear, and it's kind of impossible to live and act and do your work without your ancestors, without your cosmology, and without your roots. So when I always talk about climate change, I try to first do these provocations, because we need to think how we ended up in this place, but what is our paper in this crisis? And being an indigenous woman in all this situation, it's a great challenge. It's a great challenge because the girls already mentioned how we are affected as women, but when we talk from our perspective as indigenous women, we have more barriers, we have more difficulties to access good health system, to access justice, to access I don't know, any other facilities that you have in the Western society. Because when this crisis comes to our regions, they first come the reasons, yes? For example, in our region, I come from the South Mato Grosso, we have big farmers of monoculture, of cows, sorry, and we are in the front lines of the effects, like when we have big dries or we have floods, but we also are affected by these men that come from outside and go to our regions, like for example in this scenario of pandemic, of the COVID pandemic, we had the gold miners getting in our territories, and when they go to our territories, they violate our women's, not only physically but psychologically, and also we are affected by our deeper relationship with the environment. Most of the men, and this in the Western society, they like to say that the women are more sensible, that we are more weak. But actually, from our perspective, in our cosmology, actually, those are the things that makes us stronger. It's because we have this sensibility and this deeper connection with the nature that we are more how can I say, not more wise, but more respected as well in our communities. So other thing, yes, we are more vulnerable because of all these issues, like not have our rights guaranteed by the law or the political fights that we have in our lands, because the political are the ones that are feeding these conflicts in our lands. But this word vulnerable is something that always bothered me. I don't think like we are actually vulnerable. I think we are threatened by all this crisis, by all this catastrophes. But the question that I always do to myself is, how come the population that holds and keeps more than 80% of the biodiversity of the world is the one that is most endangered by the same crisis? How come the ones that are protecting the environment for the entire population of the world is the one that is most being disrespectful, that is the one that is getting more violence? So we need to think about how we are dealing with this balance. It's not fair that the ones that are the keepers, the savers, and we don't even like this position, like it would be for us much better if we could like live our lives in our communities, in our ways, and without worrying about what is going to happen with the world. But unfortunately, not everyone in the society has this conscience. So for a long time, since the colonizer arrived in our lands, we are saying, talking, and trying to explain to this other how we can live in a harmful, in a peaceful way between each other, not only between us as humans, but all the living beings that we have in the world. And so beyond that, beyond these issues about the diversity and the violence that we face, there is also the problem of the culture. The girls would mention about the barriers, and another barrier that I want to bring for us to discuss is the corruption of our men. So culturally, normally in the most of the communities here in Brazil, of course, we have difference. We are more than 300 different nations, so each one has their own way of living. But most of them, the political and the social aspects are leading by the men. This happens in my community, but I know that it happens in other as well. So the men were the responsible for many years to lead this contact between our people and the non-Indigenous peoples. Unfortunately, with the past of the years, and this is something really problematic for us to speak, because how come we're gonna speak against our men, against our own people? This is really, really difficult. It's a delicate issue, but we need to say it because the men were the one leading all this process, and now we are seeing our men getting corrupted by the system. For example, Paloma mentioned the carbon market. We have some men that are willing to negotiate inside those types of market. But we as women, we understand that nothing that comes from the earth can be negotiated, because it's something that it's given for us, it's something that we have a deeper relationship with, and it's not something that you can put a price on it. And so the last years, I would say, well, of course, we have some women that are really vanguardists that are in the movement for a long time ago. But the last years, we have the increase of the participation of Indigenous women in the decision-making process. So this, for us, is a big step, because not only we are facing our own men, we are facing the prejudice from the non-Indigenous people. We are facing the racism, because how come an Indigenous woman can be in this place, like facing the stereotypes that also is related to sexuality. And so these don't give us respect when we are talking about serious subjects. And also, we have to face machismo. So there's three big barriers inside our culture, outside our culture, and even though we are pushing harder, because we understand that the time that we are living, it doesn't give us the right to continue only like living your lives in an individual way. I could like simply not care about it, what is happening with the world. But we were taught that our fight as indigenous woman, in the indigenous woman, is something bigger than ourselves. When we are indigenous, we can't say no to the fight, because if you're saying no to the fight, you're saying no to your life. So it's quite tricky. And so, okay, all these barriers, and we arrive to the participation of the women's. Why our participation is important? Why it's different? I mentioned a little bit about the difference with our men's, but I think it's also the time, and this is not only for indigenous women, but I think for all the women in the world, it's time for us to bring our characteristics that during many years were taken by floods, like the sensibility that I mentioned, and really empower ourselves with them. So for our culture, the sensibility is not something bad, but it's something that gives us a deeper connection that the men, they don't have it. So with this deeper connection, I have more sensibility to act, to think. I will not only, as a woman, I will not only fight for myself, I would fight for my people, for my community, for my land, and for my culture. And I see this with other women that are fighting also for climate change. But and getting a little bit what Paloma said, we need to go a step forward. We not only could have this sensibility and these clear thoughts in our minds, but we have to increase and involve more people in this movement. So I'm really glad that nowadays I say myself as a feminist, because this is actually something, it's a word that it's still different for us. Not many women, indigenous women, like to be included in this group. So it's something that we are constructing now. But the union of the women, and we see this inside the indigenous movement, that we from different nations, from different regions, from different contexts, that we are getting together to discuss how we could create strategies, how we could include women, youth in this process. We have to think now in a macro view, like how we could discuss between women from different nations of the world, because we have the same purpose. It doesn't matter if you are a mother or not, but you have the spirit of taking care. You're taking care of your family, you're taking care of your home, you take care of your place that you live. So we need to feed this feeling and create partnership between women, because only with empathy we could change this way of living that we are now. And other thing, it's now that we are fighting for, because last year we have our first indigenous woman meeting of Brazil, and one of the big issues that was discussed is about land, and because this is the mother of our fights, that is deeper connected with climate change. But right now, even with the pandemic scenario, we are going to the second meeting of Indigenous Women of Brazil. So I also would like to give the invitation for you. It's going to be in 7 and 8 of August, like this weekend, because we're going to discuss these issues and how the women could be more related to, participated, be on the table and not be served. This is a saying that I heard once that I like it a lot, because for us it means exactly that. For Indigenous women, like we are tired of being in the community or in places that we are not being heard. We need to be heard not only by our men, but to other levels of the society. And we know we have difficulties, but we need those partnerships so we can be more included, that we could bring our voice, our cosmology view, and change and do exchanges of knowledge. And to conclude, I want to say that we have a big responsible. Nowadays, we are facing a huge crisis, and with this pandemic scenario, it's not gonna be the only challenge that we're gonna face in these next years. Everybody that is working with climate knows that this is just one of the challenge that we are facing. In our traditional histories, we have this transition. We say that transition, it's a transition that is made by our mother. So talking about the feminism, the importance of the women, we need to bring it back. The first mother, the first woman that is taking care of us, that normally people don't remember of her, but it's our Mother Earth. And I know that some people don't like to say it like that. They say that it's already penalized. Can I say like that? Like, people don't give the importance that it because a lot of people already say it about it. But we need to bring it back, the sensibility and the relationship that we have with Earth, with mothers, with women's, and understand that it doesn't matter how we want to be in this world. If I want to be a mother, if I want to study, if I want to do things that men do, it doesn't matter. What is really important, it's how we keep our tradition, how we keep our knowledge alive, respecting and creating empathy between the humanity. Related to these transitions that I was mentioning, the traditional stories that I've heard, and not only from my people, but from different nations around the globe, we are seeing that the importance of the woman nowadays, it's super important for the change. So I want to let the message that for all the women that are listening, and all the men that also listen to us, because this is a conversation that is not only for the women to unite ourselves, to respect ourselves and create empathy and networks between the women, but also for the men. And I would end with this small story in the community, that once a woman came to talk about feminism, and she wanted to separate only the women to talk about feminism. And we didn't let, because for us, if the subject is about women, and it's not related to the sacred teams that we have, the men needs to listen. Because if it's something related to the women, the men need to listen, because the man lives with the women, even that they are not married, because in the culture we have balances: the woman, the man, the night, the day. So we need to create these balances between cultures. We need to create this respect, and not to, and this is for the white people that are seeing, not to try to push the way that you guys see and think the solutions. Bring us to the discussion. It's not it's not a fake data, you know, like it's something real. We are holding 80% of the biodiversity of the world to date. So I think we are doing something right. Keeping our knowledge, keeping our roots is something that gave us threat, and we are trying to create this relationship with the Western world as well. Myself, I'm living both worlds. I like to say that, between the tradition and the modern, and I see there is many possibilities, especially for the women engaged in the front lines. So I want to thank you, everyone, and remember, the revolution will be feminist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tylee. It was fascinating, your talk and your message, and I would have lots of things to comment. It strikes me that see Indigenous women as vulnerable, and in fact, you are a warrior, you are a fighter, and there are lots of wonderful message for you. Tylee is amazing. All the world should have an opportunity to at least once to meet her. And Sylvia also said, totally agree with Tylee. A man-made world brought us here. It's a woman's job to get us out of here. And then Sylvia started to think about to an agenda to discuss this further. So I think it might be something that it will be very good to everybody. And now, last but not least, I would like to invite Sylvia Marcon. Sylvia is head of the C40 Women for Climate initiative, designed to advance and support the emergence of the next generation of female climate leaders in C40 cities. We have some female climate leaders already here. She is the former director of the green think tank foundation, the Écologie Politique in France. Sylvia has worked for several years at the French WWF office as the institutional relations manager responsible for the National Energy Transition Bill. Sylvia is graduated in international relations from the University of Trieste in Italy and holds a master's degree in urban sociology from the School of Advanced Studies in Social Science in Paris, France. Please, Sylvia, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Adriana. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for everyone for joining. And I was really moved by Tylee and message, and I absolutely hear you. I think it's a powerful message that we really need to elevate and disseminate as much as possible. And I hope we will have a chance to connect later. What I wanted to say is our door and the Women for Climate community door is absolutely open. Apologies, I will build a bit on what Louisa's introduction has made, and my intervention will probably bring you back a little bit on cities, but I guess the whole reasoning that we need to take on addressing climate change and providing with solution is not disconnected to what we just heard by Tylee. And I will make the case in my presentation for urban planning and climate action to be gender responsive and gender inclusive. And I will touch base on three main issues: women representation in decision making and the importance of bridging all women perspectives and experiences in the decision making process. I will build on the example of transport to illustrate a gendered perspective on urban mobility, and touch base on developing gender-responsive participatory planning and collecting gender disaggregated data. And I will, of course, talk to you about Women for Climate program, which I had the chance to lead for the past 3 years, and which is the way C40 is contributing to this conversation globally. On the first item, including more women leadership in position, I think you have all made the case for this, so I want to expand more. I think everyone agrees that we cannot achieve sustainable development without an equal representation of men and women in politics. And yet, we all know that women are still very much underrepresented. And I wanted to provide you with a quick overview coming from the macro perspective of United Nations and the UNFCCC negotiation, where women represent 37% of all the country delegates present at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is not much, but it's not that bad. I will go on a more national perspective. Currently, only 6 women are serving as head of state and 9 are serving as head of government. They were 11 last year and 12 head of government still last year. Which is an inflection in the number, of course, but this also shows a more broader picture. Most of the world nations have never had a female leader, and this is very much speaking to what Taylor just said. I have the feeling for a long time now that hundreds of men-led conversation, solution, and to some extent also competition have brought us here. And if we can make the space now for a different, and I'm not just making the case for women, but also for men to embody different leadership models, I think we might find a way to get out of here. And why I'm stopping on most of the world nations have never had a female leader, because there are also some interesting elements that show that including women voices and women perspective in decision making make a change for the planet. 2 different studies, one on 130 countries, another one on 80 countries, suggest that those countries with higher women in decision-making position are actually more prompt to protect land areas and also ratify environmental treaties. So I think this makes the case for an increase in women leadership. If we go down on a more regional perspective and look at the data on Latin America, as per June this year, the regional average of the percentage of women in national parliament were almost 28% for Central America and 25% for South America, which is very consistent to the all other continent average percentages, but yet it's still 1/4 of the table, so yet not enough. If we go down, and I really thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, because it allowed me the time to look at this more closely. I look at the data for Brazil, and there are wonderful database to collect those data. And the proportion of seats held by women in local government are only 30.5%. And the percentage of elected mayor who are female is definitely consistently increasing in Brazil since the 90. This is the database I managed to find. And if you are interested in looking at this, I suggest, and I cannot recommend more, to look at the Alzijar Institute profile of the female mayor in Brazil. I read this document last year and it was very interesting. Most of it is translated. As you can see, currently there are 11.7 women in charge of city hall in Brazil. But what I also discovered by reading this document, and allow me to acknowledge this, Brazil was actually the first Latin American country to elect a woman at city hall, which is Luisa Alzira Teixeira Soriano, in Rio Grande do Norte in 1928. So what cities can do to increase women leadership? Of course, this is probably, and most of the action needs to be taken by the state level legislation. There are institutional mechanisms that can change, but cities can revise rules and procedures, and if necessary, also reform the local electoral system in order to include gender equity targets and make them accountable against this. But what I would like to underscore, and Luisa touched base on this on her presentation, is that for women leadership and participation in climate action actually extend beyond politics. What we call the built environment sector, urban planning, architecture, housing, energy, transport, infrastructure, all contributed and are impacted by climate change. And as with politics, women are still represented across this sector. So if we continue to build policies and projects in this sector without including women's meaningful participation, expertise, and experience, which are definitely differentiated by the one of men. They do not walk in the city as men do. And within women, it has been underscored by all my precedent fellow, we are not all the same. So everyone experiences city with other identities on top of the one of its gender. So if we continue to build policies that do not include women perspective and voices and all women perspective and voices, we will increasing existing inequalities and of course decreasing effectiveness. So let me build on the example of transport and transport in urban sector to provide you with and try to use this example as a way to underscore where we can draft better and design more effective decision and policy implementation. It's an excellent example because, of course, you all know that transport in cities is one of the first emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. So reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that come from this sector is key. And if we do not look at all opportunity from all citizens, not only men, we won't be able to succeed this, and we will never be able to reduce greenhouse gas emission to the level we need to do over the next 10 years. So historically and structurally, bus and metro networks in cities tend to prioritize long distance and radial journeys, so bringing commuter from suburbs and other neighborhood in the city center. And these routes are statistically being used more by men traveling to and from workplaces. And all transport planning tends to very much build on cost-effective analysis, which typically also optimize peak hour work commuter. And this, of course, disadvantage those working outside of formal labor. We underscore these are very much in all the world women, and also disadvantage those that are not traveling at non-peak in hour times and are traveling for other purposes such as care, social, and leisure-related travel. And I think, Paloma, you were very right, and thanks for underscoring how much psychological anxiety and stress these bring to women, being constantly multitasking and taking care of the travel, the safe, and the health of the family and the closest people. So what I'm trying to show here is that statistically and historically, women are more likely to be included in this disadvantages group. They take shorter trips with multiple stops at different time of the day, which are not the one of traditional commuter hour. So the woman journey on top of this are encumbered by all the caregiving work they provide for free. And as underscored previously, women face more safety concern when taking public transport, and their decision making is very much based on the safest and the perception of their safest. So these are an example of how we have built non-responsive public transport planning and how much it is important to get back on our feet and try to translate all the barrier that women have faced, but also better understand unique mobility needs and barriers that women have experienced so far. Here you have case studies we have run with the city of Sydney and published last May. It investigates exactly walking and cycling undertaken by women, so all the complex trips that women need to take in Greater Sydney, and it's, I believe, a perfect example on how we can support women to adopt low carbon and no motorized transport, and it very much confirmed what I just mentioned on complex trips in regard to women experiencing cities, and provided a set of recommendation and action to increase the number of women who walk as part of their everyday journey. To develop sustainable transport solution, city very much needs to change its perspective and try to apply non-economic value analysis and try to collect data that allow to understand the benefit for all citizens of decision making. And in order to do so, alternative policies, tools, and measurement system needs to be included in the decision-making dashboard. Here you have the example of gender-responsive participatory planning. It's one of a couple of examples that comes from the recommendation we drafted with the City of Sydney, and touch base on conducting focus group discussion with both women and men, and but also try and proactively from City Hall reach out to underrepresented community in policymaking, and undertake consultation and engagement in location where these communities and women already gather. So we do not try to ask these women to adapt to City Hall time and time frame. We need to proactively find solution, and it's very much spoke to what we just hear from Paloma, the importance of hearing each other's, the importance of finding the space and the time and the adequate space that allowed all voices to be heard. We are talking about today of women and also young people. Of course, this focus group, these underrepresented communities are the one we want to target to build more stronger and more effective gender inclusive and gender responsive climate action. Another example, and allow me to go quite quickly because I think it's quite straightforward, is the case studies we run with the city of San Francisco. It's a very important point how we manage to close the gender disaggregated data gap. If we do not know what we are targeting as an expected outcome, if we do not know where women who are more impacted or where frontline population are more present and what are the extent of the impact that they are experiencing, we won't be able to draft and design sustainable solution and inclusive and responsive gender action. So the case studies was really investigating issue on gender, race, affordability and mobility associated with the biking system in one of the San Francisco neighborhood. And collecting gender disaggregated data and as well as race disaggregated data allowed us to reveal these differences and goes really into deep of the different experience we have of transport and mobility in cities. But it also provides the city decision maker and any stakeholder part of this conversation with common data, indicators, and a common vocabulary, which is, again, very important to be able to communicate and find solution and draft solution together. One of the, I believe, most interesting data we collected with the city of San Francisco, on top, of course, of showing that white men were disproportionately represented in city biking, it was also to understand better understand the underrepresentation of women, and how cultural and social factor contributed to this underrepresentation, which was very important within Asian and Hispanic and Latinos women in city biking. What C40 and C40 cities working with Women for Climate are trying to do. Allow me to touch base very quickly, because I think the conversation will be very interesting. So I'm trying to wrap up my intervention as soon as possible. Women for Climate program is a program we have developed under the leadership of the Mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, which has been the C40 network chair between 2016 and 2019, and we were very much just outside of the signature of the Paris Agreement on Climate, the first international treaty that underscored the importance of citizen engagement and everyone inclusion in the drafting of solution. And we wanted to, of course, with this initiative, not only raise awareness on this differentiated impact on climate, of climate on women, but we also wanted to highlight the incredible and key role of women playing in championing climate solution in cities and way beyond the cities. So we designed the initiative with two main work streams, a research and tangible urban policy recommendation guide. So all the data and knowledge I've just shared come from this work stream of the Women for Climate initiative. And a second one, which was really intentional in empowering and advancing women leadership in climate action, with two main action. The development of a local mentorship scheme in participating city, but as well as a global network of women who can collaborate and leverage each other, and a global Women for Climate Tech Challenge. So to get you more information on the mentorship scheme, what cities do is that they publish a call for application for women who are developing a climate program or project that can participate in matching the target of the climate plan of the city. And we help the city selecting these women and matching them with mentors who are senior, professional, and committed leaders from business sector, international organization sector, as well as CTO and deputy mayors. And mentors guide the mentees to accelerate their project through regular one-to-one meeting. And of course, on top of the one-to-one meeting, C40 provides remote training opportunities and activities to skill the women that participate locally in the mentorship scheme and their self-confidence. But most importantly, allow this collaboration to rise within women that live in 16 different cities. And the length of the mentorship program is for 6 to 10 months. The Women for Climate Tech Challenge is a little bit different, is an international contest, so open to women who carry out a specific technical solution for climate change. And we are just in the process of selecting the second year winner. How C40 support the women and how cities support these women is by providing them the opportunity to experiment their solution in real life in the cities, so providing access to urban experimentation. And C40 support this with his partner to enable the experimentation through grant and acceleration. And I think I'm happy to stop here, and maybe leaving you with one general consideration on how we should consider gender in the future, and how we can support this common conversation within climate change and gender. I really very much look at gender as a pair of glasses. Once you have worn them, you cannot unworn them. You walk with them through the city, and I really encourage everyone to consider all the different identities that have been raised by all the speakers today. And when you observe the city, biking in city, public transport, and any public space, how it is shared, it is fairly shared. How many people, how many diverse people can you observe? This is the beginning of potential solution that we can draft together if we are all conscious and aware that there is definitely an unfair share of space and power that need to be rebalanced with intention and collaboration.
Thank you very much, Silvia. It was wonderful. It was really, really good. I think now we can have all of us together in sharing the screen. And then we have some questions that I'd like to share with you all, with you guys. One question is from Luciano and Lina. They asked, what are, and I think Silvia has mentioned some of that already, what are the available solutions for climate problems that include reduction of gender inequality? Silvia mentioned something regarding to transportation, to cycling. Would you like, maybe Silvia or Luisa, would you like to add something or comment something on that?
I have just spoke. I think Luisa can take this over.
Thank you, Sylvia. I think that a lot of the examples that you've given are really, really great. And I think what should be clear is that when we talk, we really talk about mainly about cities and what can be done at the level of the city. What I think is really obvious from everyone's intervention is that participation is absolutely fundamental. But when we talk about cities, what's really been interesting from my experience is that actually participation and having everyone's voice in the room is just not enough. First of all, because cities can become overwhelmed and paralyzed with the amount of ideas and contributions that come to their table. Even if their participation has not been all-inclusive, they still become overwhelmed and paralyzed, and they just don't know what to do with this, with all of this information, or with when they have it. So I think I just want to highlight again that yes, participation is absolutely fundamental, but also having women and other gender identities at decision-making and budgetary levels of policymaking is crucial, because they will know what to do with the information. And they will also make sure that there are budgets in place and criteria on how to use those budgets that will target the three entry points which I mentioned, which are shifting power relations, which are addressing the unjust structures and systems that are in place, and which are building, using budgets to build women's and young girls' agency and empowerment through these climate actions. So participation, ensuring that there's budgets and people at the decision-making level who are representing these needs. And I think something that Tali mentioned, which I really want to re-emphasize, I think is also the crucial component of bringing men and boys onto the decision-making, into the conversation. I do think that I really believe that the behavior change that is required is not just going to happen from the women's perspective and from other gender groups generally. I think men and boys need to be involved. So I think in terms of climate change, I think that's generally what I would recommend. Again, addressing through climate actions, addressing those root causes is how we can overcome gender inequality through climate action. I think I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you, Luisa. And Edla said, very interesting information and case studies, congratulations. And I have a comment from Edla as well, and also a question that maybe you can start with Paloma and Tylee to answer these questions. So Edla says, to me, all about this include all to look for the solutions for climate change, all of us, to climate change. It seems to be possible only if we change the way we feel about other people. And it's not an easy solution. So he asks, how can we change this? So Tylee, maybe you would like to start and then you go to Paloma.
Okay, so it's difficult. It's not an easy task. We are, as humanity, for more than 100 years here in this world, and we're still like trying to adjust and understand the way we live here. But I think the main, the basic thing that we need to change first is the education. How we are educating our children to respect the other. And again, it's not about the other human being, but the other living beings that are in the world. So there is a philosophy in Latin America from our brothers from the Quechua people and the Aymara people that they say the bem viver, the good living. I think I can do it like that. Yeah. That is to try to understand how to understand first your individuality and who you are and what are your needs and what the ways you react, and understand you, and then you're gonna understand how you can add and change and contribute with the society and contribute with the other. But we say that you need to first understand yourself, and this is not something easy in the world that we are living, because nowadays this Western society, this capitalist society that we live, the thing that they do is to bring you more distance from yourself. You don't know who you are anymore. That's why we have the biggest disease in this world is the depression, because people, they are not happy with themselves. This thing about depression, it didn't exist in our communities. It came with the non-Indigenous arriving in our lands, getting our lands from ourselves, and then the depression came, because we lost the balance on how to live in this world. So Adler is not an easy task, but I would say that it's already, we always need to start at some point, and it's easier, if I can say, it's easier when you're not doing by yourself. So if you have a friend, someone in a family that it's up to do the changing right now.
Thank you, Tylee. Paloma, would you like to comment something?
Yeah, I think just to add to what Tylee said, that is super important, that we cannot have any kind of information or participate if we don't are educated on the matter, or if we don't understand what is being talking about. And what I wanted to add is that just that to raise the thing that's why representation and participation is super important. I mean, I grew up in a world that I see women that look like me, I don't know, being great actors, participating in exclusive things, but I cannot imagine how it was for Tylee. Like, did she saw such indigenous artists in big positions? Now we have like Joênia Wapichana here in Brazil in this chair as a deputy, and I can only imagine how much this represents, because I know that right now, like Tylee and all of the indigenous here in Brazil, they know they can be in this position, and I am sure they are going to occupy it much more. But we need to keep guaranteeing this diversity and these opportunities, not only for indigenous, but also for the quilombolas, for the traditional people, for women. It's so many great when we see like a woman as a president, for example, as a deputy or something. Like here, you identify yourself and you say, yeah, I can do it too. If she did, I can do it. And I just wanted to add that it's not easy, but if we keep working, like putting women in decision positions, I am sure all women that are going to raise, because it was the I don't know how to say that, but what the phrase says: if a woman rise, all women rise together.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you very much, Paloma. Ladies, we have 4 minutes. We have lots of questions, but I think it's a good sign, because, you know, it's raised lots of questions and interest. So it is something that we need to talk about, and you need to put in action as well. So what I'd like to do to close up is to give quite of 1 minute each to finalize, and we are already 15 minutes out of our time. So we really need to wrap up. So I'd like to start with Sylvia.
Yeah, thank you, Adriana. And really, I feel to thank you, all of you. I spent a wonderful hour and a half, and it actually feels good to hear people that have meaningful messages and that needs to be amplified. So I want to add nothing more except of what Paloma just said. Role modeling, it's absolutely crucial. And one of the things we hope to achieve as a network of city is also highlighting these incredible women that are leading global cities. They have progressive agendas, they represent diversity, and they are committed leaders. So we hope, and I believe that young women can look at them and run for office, because they can see themselves in these women and take over the planet.
Thank you, Sylvia. Luisa.
Yeah, I think I really cannot match the inspiration that we've heard from Tylee and Paloma, particularly. I think it was really wonderful to hear your interventions, and I really want to highlight. I think especially from Tylee, coming from both being a woman and Indigenous, I really think that the one key message to take away is the importance of intersectionality. Like, different women are all different, and all forms of women need to be represented. Like Paloma was saying, with role models, you saw role models, and perhaps other identities don't see those things. So I completely agree with Sylvia's comments, and highlights the intersectionality component, which is crucial.
Tylee,
that's all. Thanks.
Final thoughts.
So I want to say thank you to all the women that are here with me in this panel, to the ones that are listening us, you, Adriana and Daniela, that is helping us in the backstage. And to say it again, that women's, we are occupying spaces that the men said that we were not supposed to. We have the technical knowledge, we are getting more stronger, more wise, but we should never forget to work with our hearts, with our sensibilities. Never let the men think that this is our flaws, because this is what makes us stronger. And yeah, let's work together to change this world.
Thank you. Paloma?
Taking the wave on what Tylee said, I just want to remember that our Earth is our Mother Earth, as Tylee said. And what you all said so much wisely, and it was like a class, this panel. I learned it so much. I just want to say that as our Earth is our mother and we are women, it's our responsibility to be empathic for each other and raise each other's voices and each other's spirits, and give all the leadership positions to women. We are going to make the revolution.
Excellent. Cool. To finish, we just have 1 minute. I'd like to read actually a message who arrived from Cristina Huidoro, who is the Chief Resilience Officer of Santiago de Chile. And Cristina says, thank you very much for this. This was a very interesting panel since the pandemic has increased the gender gap in many issues. At the same, it can be an opportunity to push for innovation with gender perspective in our cities. I would like to thank you guys very, very much. It was a pleasure to create and to build together, to co-create, actually. This is what we did, this section with you guys. And I really hope that we can continue this conversation and maybe we can build an agenda together to put this work on gender and climate action forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.